Haley thought it would be just another rushed morning on her way to work, until a little girl darted into the street, a car sped toward her, and instinct took over. Seconds later, Haley was on the ground, the child safe in her arms, and the man who ran to them wasn't just her father. He was someone who would turn her quiet world upside down in ways she never could have imagined. Haley Brooks was late. Again. The morning was gray, the streets still wet from the light rain that had passed through at dawn, and the city was already pulsing with noise. Her sneakers splashed through a shallow puddle as she darted across the crosswalk, coffee in one hand and her work bag swinging from the other. Her hospital badge bounced against her chest with every step, and all she could think about was whether she'd get written up for being 5 minutes past shift again. She turned the corner at the busy plaza she passed every day, where street performers competed with food carts and tourists snapped pictures of the city skyline. Haley weaved through the crowd, her mind on 4 charts and patient rounds, when something to her left caught her attention. A man stood at the edge of the sidewalk, holding the hand of a young girl. He looked distracted, glancing at his phone briefly, while the girl, no more than 8 years old, squirmed beside him. Her curly blonde hair bounced as she tried to tug free from his grip, a small stuffed rabbit dangling from her other hand. The man looked up just in time to see the girl break free and dart forward. She ran straight toward the curb, where the morning traffic had just begun to thicken. He shouted, lunged after her, but she was already halfway off the sidewalk. Haley didn't think. Instinct took over. She dropped her coffee, her bag hit the ground, and she sprinted. The girl tripped at the edge of the street just as a silver SUV barreled toward the intersection. In a split second, Haley reached her, yanked her backward by the arm, and the two of them fell hard onto the sidewalk as the vehicle skidded past with a blaring horn and a gust of wind. Everything paused for a beat. The noise, the rush of the city, it all faded into silence as Haley sat up, cradling the girl against her chest. "You're okay. You're all right," she murmured, heart pounding in her ears. The girl clung to her, shaking, her knees scraped in her rabbit toy now dangling by one ear. Then came footsteps. The man knelt beside them, panic written across his face. He pulled the girl into his arms, checking her frantically, his breath ragged. I looked away for a second," he said, mostly to himself. "Oh my God. Are you hurt? Liv, are you okay?" "I'm okay, Daddy," the girl whispered, her voice muffled. Haley slowly stood, brushing dust off her scrubs. A thin cut on her palm stung, and her knees throbbed from where they'd hit the pavement, but she barely noticed. The man turned to her, still holding his daughter tightly. His voice was rough with emotion when he spoke. "You saved her. I didn't see, if you hadn't." "It's all right," Haley said gently. "She's safe. That's all that matters." He looked up at her then, really looked. There was something about his face that struck her, sharp jawline, stormy blue eyes, and a kind of quiet intensity. His clothes were expensive, tailored, out of place in the middle of this sidewalk chaos. "I'm Andrew Rains," he said, standing now, still holding his daughter close. "This is Olivia." Haley gave a small nod. "Haley. I'm a nurse. Guess I'm always on duty." There was a beat of silence. Olivia peeked at her from over her father's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. Haley smiled, soft and surprised. "You're welcome, sweetheart." Without waiting for anything else, she picked up her bag, now damp from the pavement, and continued on her way, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could ask more questions. She didn't look back. She never expected to see them again. But life, as she would soon learn, had other plans. The hospital lobby was unusually quiet when Haley stepped inside, her damp bag still slung over one shoulder and adrenaline slowly ebbing from her veins. She had made it to her shift with seconds to spare, her hands still trembling slightly from the morning's chaos. No one noticed, just another nurse rushing in late. But her mind wouldn't let go of the image of the girl's wide, frightened eyes, or the sound of tires screeching far too close. She tried to push it aside, tried to focus on the charts, the patience, the rhythms of her job, but something about that encounter lingered under her skin. Midway through her lunch break, as she sat alone in the small, windowless break room trying to eat a cup of yogurt and forget the morning, the head charge nurse appeared in the doorway with an odd expression on her face. She held a clipboard in one hand and looked directly at Haley. "There's someone asking for you in the front lobby," she said. Tall man. Said his name was Andrew Rains. "He's insistent." Haley's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. The name didn't immediately register, but the look on the nurse's face told her this wasn't a patient or a delivery guy. She put the yogurt aside and stood slowly, suddenly aware of how tired she looked in her wrinkled scrubs. She made her way down the hall, her heartbeat quickening with every step. The moment she stepped into the lobby, she saw him. Andrew Rains stood near the front desk, out of place among the chipped tile floor and aging plastic chairs. He wore a charcoal gray coat over a tailored suit, his expression unreadable but intent. He wasn't scrolling through his phone or pacing, he was still, alert, waiting only for her. When their eyes met, he approached without hesitation. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice smoother than she remembered. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I realize this is unorthodox." "I didn't agree to anything," she said cautiously, stopping a few feet from him. "You tracked me down." "I did," he admitted. "I had to. I needed to thank you properly." "You already did. Your daughter is fine. That's what matters." "She's more than fine. She's different," he said quietly, as if the words were difficult to form. "Since the incident, she's been calmer. She talked about you for hours. She doesn't usually open up to strangers. Not since her mother passed." Haley's expression softened slightly. She hadn't known that part. She thought back to the little girl's eyes, how old they looked for someone so young. "I'm sorry," she said gently. Andrew nodded. "So am I. For a lot of things. But today I came here because I wanted to offer you dinner. No expectations, no pressure. Just one conversation. My way of saying thank you. And perhaps hearing how someone like you runs toward danger when everyone else freezes." Haley blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just reacted." "That's exactly what makes it extraordinary," he replied. There was a long pause between them, and for a moment, Haley wasn't sure what to say. No one had ever shown up at her job like this. No one had ever looked at her with such direct sincerity either. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," she said finally. "You're clearly from a very different world." Andrew's lips twitched into a half-smile. "You don't even know what world I'm from." She raised an eyebrow. "You're wearing a watch worth more than my car." He glanced down at his wrist and gave a small, rueful nod. "Fair enough. But I still meant what I said." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I appreciate the gesture. Really. But I have patients to see." Andrew didn't argue. He simply reached into his coat pocket and handed her a sleek business card with his name embossed in silver. "If you ever change your mind," he said, "I'd like to see you again. For Olivia's sake. And maybe for mine, too." Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the tiled corridor until the automatic doors swallowed him up. Haley stood there for a long moment, card in hand, unsure whether she felt flattered, curious, or just completely thrown. She slipped the card into her pocket and returned to the break room, her half-eaten yogurt now forgotten. She didn't know if she'd ever call. But deep down, something told her this wasn't the last time she'd see Andrew Rains. 3 days passed, and Haley did her best to return to normal. Her shifts were long and grueling, filled with back-to-back patients, endless paperwork, and the constant hum of beeping monitors. The hospital didn't slow down for personal distractions, and she had no time to dwell on anything outside of the fluorescent-lit walls. But despite her best efforts, her mind kept drifting back to the man in the charcoal gray coat. Andrew Rains. She replayed their conversation more times than she cared to admit, his voice, calm and clear, his eyes, sincere but guarded, and the way he spoke about his daughter with a quiet ache that hadn't felt rehearsed or polished, only real. She hadn't touched the business card since tucking it away in her locker. It was still there, wedged between a granola bar and an unused surgical mask, as if waiting for her to make a decision she wasn't ready to make. She kept telling herself it was nothing. He was just being polite. Rich men with private drivers and custom suits didn't actually follow up. But when she left work on Friday night, stepping into the cool spring air, she found herself looking around instinctively. She didn't know if she hoped to see him or hoped she wouldn't. She walked the few blocks to her apartment, passing the small corner grocery where she usually grabbed dinner, but instead of going in, she kept walking. Her mind felt restless, full of unspoken questions. When she finally reached her building, she paused before heading up the stairs. There, sitting on the top step, was a familiar shape. Andrew stood as soon as he saw her, dressed more casually this time, dark jeans, a light sweater, and no watch in sight. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who'd spent the last hour convincing himself not to leave. "Before you say anything," he said, lifting a hand, "I promise I'm not stalking you. Olivia insisted on drawing you something. I was going to leave it at your door, but then I thought, maybe I'd ask if you'd changed your mind." Haley stared at him for a long moment. Her first instinct was to turn him down, to tell him this was too strange, too fast. But there was something about the way he stood there, clearly out of his comfort zone, that softened her hesitation. "You waited?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "I did." She crossed her arms, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. "Why?" Andrew exhaled, glancing down briefly. "Because I meant it when I said I wanted to thank you properly. And because my daughter hasn't stopped talking about you since that morning. She keeps asking if we'll see you again. You made her feel safe, which is something she hasn't felt in a long time." Haley felt a knot form in her chest at his words. It wasn't just flattery, it was the kind of vulnerable honesty she didn't expect from someone like him. Still, she had to ask. "You're not doing this out of guilt, right? Or obligation?" He looked up at her with a small, quiet smile. "No. I'm doing it because I don't want to wonder what might have happened if I hadn't come back." She didn't answer right away. She took a breath, then sat down on the step beside him. He didn't move closer, didn't pressure her. Just waited. Finally, she turned to him. "One coffee. No interviews. No bodyguards." His smile widened slightly, but he nodded. "One coffee. And not tonight," she added quickly. "I smell like antiseptic and haven't eaten in 12 hours. He chuckled. "Understood. Tomorrow?" Haley gave him a tired but genuine smile. "Tomorrow." As he stood and handed her a folded piece of paper, the drawing from Olivia, full of bright colors and stick figures, Haley felt something unexpected. Not nerves. Not fear. Curiosity. As she watched him walk away, her fingers still clutching the childlike sketch, she realized that something had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like running from it. The coffee shop was small, tucked between an old bookstore and a florist, the kind of place Haley had passed 100 times but never actually walked into. When she stepped inside the next morning, she found Andrew already there, sitting at a table near the window with 2 steaming cups waiting. He stood when he saw her, a polite gesture that felt strangely out of place in today's world, and she gave him a wary smile as she pulled off her coat. He looked different in the daylight, more approachable, less composed, almost tired in a way that made her wonder if he ever let himself fully rest. She sat down across from him, and for a few moments, they both simply sipped their coffee in silence, letting the quiet murmur of the shop fill the space between them. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said eventually, his voice low but steady. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "I almost talked myself out of it 3 times on the way here." He smiled gently, not offended. "I don't blame you. If our situations were reversed, I probably wouldn't trust me either. Haley raised an eyebrow, intrigued. You're surprisingly self-aware for a man who owns a medical empire. Andrew chuckled, leaning back in his chair. That empire has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. She sipped her drink, studying him more carefully now. So what's your story? The version without the Forbes profile and perfectly edited press releases. He hesitated, then nodded as if accepting a challenge. I was born into it. My father built the company from the ground up, and I inherited it when he passed. I didn't want it at first. I was studying architecture. Thought I'd design buildings, not hospitals. But when my dad got sick, everything changed. I took over because I had to. Then I stayed because I couldn't walk away. Haley listened without interrupting. She could hear the weight in his words, the sense of duty, maybe even regret. And Olivia? She asked gently. His eyes softened at the mention of his daughter. She's the only thing that makes any of it worth it. Her mother died in a car accident 2 years ago. Since then, it's just been the two of us. And I've made a lot of mistakes trying to protect her. Haley lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. You're not the only one who's had to change plans. My life didn't turn out how I thought it would either. Andrew looked at her, genuinely curious. What did you want? She paused, caught off guard by the question. No one had asked her that in a long time. I wanted to be a teacher, she said after a moment. But my brother got sick. Our parents were gone. I needed money, fast. Nursing school was faster. It wasn't what I planned, but I don't regret it. I'm glad you don't, he said quietly. Because if you had been anywhere else that day, I don't know what would have happened. She felt her throat tighten at his sincerity, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no flirting, no false charm, just something honest, something raw. After a long pause, Haley set her cup down and looked at him. Why me, Andrew? There are hundreds of people you could meet. Women who move in your world, who understand it. Why are you sitting here with someone who takes the subway and has a leak in her ceiling? He didn't hesitate. Because you're the only person who looked me in the eye and didn't see the last name. Because you didn't hesitate when Olivia needed help. And because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since. Her heart pounded, but she didn't look away. Something about his voice, his gaze, made it impossible. You barely know me, she whispered. He nodded. Then let me. They sat in silence again, but it was different now, thicker, warmer. Haley felt like the ground beneath her was shifting, slowly but steadily. Part of her still wanted to pull back, to protect the fragile space she'd built for herself over the years. But another part, the one that had jumped into traffic without thinking, wanted to see where this could go. When they finally stood to leave, Andrew didn't reach for her hand or say anything grand. He simply held the door open and walked beside her, matching her pace. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she had to walk alone. The next few weeks unfolded slowly, quietly, like the steady turning of pages in a book neither of them wanted to rush. Haley didn't dive into anything. She didn't change her life or give into any whirlwind fantasy. Instead, she let things unfold on her own terms. Andrew never pushed. He texted occasionally, sometimes with a simple update about Olivia, other times with a thoughtful article he thought she'd enjoy or a joke that somehow always landed just right. It wasn't intrusive. It felt easy. Comfortable. They met once a week. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes a walk in the park, once for dinner in a little corner restaurant where no one seemed to recognize Andrew for who he was. It was there that he surprised her, not with his presence or conversation, but with how intently he listened. He never interrupted, never looked at his phone, and never acted like anything was more important than what she was saying. It was unnerving in the beginning, almost too much, but it made her feel seen in a way she didn't realize she missed. One Thursday evening, he invited her to his home. He didn't call it a mansion, though by every standard, it was. The house sat on a hill, sleek and modern with wide windows and warm lighting that softened its grand exterior. Haley hesitated at the doorstep, suddenly painfully aware of the difference in their worlds. She almost turned around. But the door opened before she could knock, and there was Olivia, grinning ear to ear, holding a painting in one hand and a bowl of popcorn in the other. "You came!" Olivia exclaimed, pulling Haley inside with a grip stronger than expected from such a small child. Andrew appeared behind his daughter, looking slightly amused, wearing a t-shirt and jeans instead of his usual crisp suit. He looked more like a dad than a mogul, which made everything feel less intimidating. They spent the evening watching old animated movies and eating popcorn off porcelain plates. Haley found herself curled into the corner of an oversized couch, laughing harder than she had in months. Olivia sat beside her the entire time, head occasionally leaning against Haley's shoulder without a word. After Olivia had fallen asleep on the couch mid-movie, Andrew carried her gently upstairs. Haley wandered out onto the balcony, wrapping her sweater tighter against the cool night air. The view stretched across the city skyline, lights blinking in the distance like a sea of silent stories. When Andrew joined her a few minutes later, the silence between them felt full, not empty. "She's opened up more in the last few weeks than she has in a year," he said softly. "I don't know how you did that." Haley didn't answer right away. She watched the sky, the movement of clouds under a crescent moon. Sometimes kids don't need fixing. They just need someone to sit beside them and not expect anything. He looked at her then, and there was something new in his gaze, not admiration or gratitude, but something more fragile. "Hope, maybe. I don't know what this is turning into," he said quietly. "But I know I don't want it to end." Haley's heart skipped once, then again. She wanted to respond, but fear caught in her throat. She was so used to disappointment, to waiting for the moment people changed their minds. But Andrew didn't look away. He didn't rush her. So she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't either." They stood side by side on that balcony, neither saying much after that. The city moved below them, life humming along, unaware that two people who never expected to find each other had just chosen not to let go. And for the first time in a long time, Haley didn't feel like she had to guard her heart. Not from him. Not tonight. The following weeks brought an unexpected calm that Haley hadn't known she'd been craving. Her life didn't change dramatically. She still worked long hours at the hospital, still came home to her tiny apartment with creaky floors and a flickering bathroom light, still kept her routine steady like a heartbeat, but something inside her had shifted. The quiet was softer now, less like loneliness and more like space she could finally breathe in. Andrew and Olivia became part of her life not with force or grandeur, but with simple consistency. Andrew never overwhelmed her with gifts or made her feel indebted, and Olivia, with her childlike honesty and warmth, seemed to sense exactly when Haley needed to be pulled out of her own head. One Sunday afternoon, Haley was invited to Olivia's school play. She almost said no. She worried about the attention, the families, the uncomfortable looks that might come from those who saw her beside a man like Andrew. But Olivia had called her herself, and when a child says, "I only want you in the front row," something about that makes fear feel small. So she went, and she sat in that tiny folding chair next to Andrew, who looked at her only once during the performance but held her hand under the program the entire time. After the final applause, when Olivia ran up to them with glitter on her cheeks and a wide, proud smile, Haley felt something break open in her. She had spent so many years being needed professionally, by patients, by colleagues, by her brother in the past, but this was different. This was being wanted. Not for what she could do, but simply for who she was. Later that evening, they sat around the kitchen island in Andrew's home, eating takeout from cardboard containers and laughing at Olivia's dramatic retelling of her one line in the play. It wasn't perfect. The rice was too salty, the dog barked at a neighbor through the glass door, Olivia accidentally spilled orange soda on her shirt. But it felt real. Grounded. Like a life Haley never thought she could belong to. After Olivia went to bed, Andrew walked Haley to her car. The night was cooler than expected, the wind picking up as clouds crept across the stars. They stood for a moment in silence beside the sleek black car she had always felt too humble to drive home from this part of the city. Andrew leaned against the passenger door and looked at her, not with intensity, but with the kind of steady focus that came only from someone who wasn't in a rush to get somewhere else. "I know you're waiting for something to go wrong," he said softly. "You're used to things ending when they start to feel good." Haley didn't respond right away. The truth in his words hung between them, weighty and unflinching. She looked down at her hands, fingers fidgeting with her keys. "I guess I've just learned not to trust when something feels too good. Like it's temporary. Or conditional." "It's not," he said. "Not for me. And not for Olivia. She already sees you as family." Haley swallowed, emotion rising before she could stop it. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "What if I can't give you what you need? What if I don't know how to be in a life like yours?" He stepped forward slowly, reaching for her hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm and grounding. "Then we figure it out together. We don't need it to look like anything else. We just need it to be real." She looked up at him, eyes shining, heart racing, and for the first time, she believed him. In that moment, something shifted again, not with drama or declarations, but with quiet clarity. This wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a story of rescue. It was two people choosing to stay. Choosing each other. Despite the doubts. Despite the differences. As he kissed her forehead, and she leaned into him like it was the most natural thing in the world, Haley realized she wasn't afraid anymore. She was home.